They said no, and in that moment, it probably felt like a door closed on everything you were working toward. It felt personal. It felt like a judgment of your ability, your worth, your direction. But what most people don't realize is that rejection doesn't define you, it redirects you. It forces you to pause, to reassess, to look at things from a different angle. And while that moment feels like loss, it often carries clarity that success never gives. Because when everything goes your way, you rarely question yourself. But when you're rejected, you are pushed to grow. Rejection strips away comfort. It removes the illusion that things will just work out without effort. And that's where it becomes powerful. It builds resilience. It teaches you how to handle setbacks without collapsing. It forces you to rely on yourself instead of external approval. Most people stop at rejection, they take it as a final answer. But the ones who move forward use it as feedback. They improve, they adjust, they come back stronger. Not to prove others wrong, but because they refuse to stay the same. And over time, something shifts inside you. You stop fearing rejection because you understand its role. It is no longer something that blocks your path, it becomes part of it. It sharpens your mindset, strengthens your discipline, and removes your dependence on validation. What once felt like an obstacle becomes an advantage, because it pushed you into a version of yourself you would have never reached otherwise. Rejection cuts deeper than most people admit. It doesn't just say no to an opportunity, it challenges how you see yourself. It makes you question your ability, your direction, even your worth. And that's why so many people avoid it, or worse, let it stop them completely. But the strongest individuals don't try to escape rejection. They learn how to use it. They understand that every no carries information, pressure, and opportunity at the same time. And instead of shrinking, they shift their mindset. They stop seeing rejection as a personal attack and start seeing it as a form of direction. Reverse psychology, in this sense, is not about manipulating others, it's about retraining your own perception. When rejection happens, most people think, this means I'm not good enough. But a stronger mindset flips that instantly, this means I need to adjust, improve, or approach differently. That shift alone changes everything. Because now rejection is no longer an ending, it's feedback. It tells you where you stand, what needs work, and where you need to grow. And when you start treating it that way, it loses its emotional weight and becomes a tool. Over time, this mindset builds resilience. You stop fearing rejection because you know it cannot stop you, it can only refine you. Every setback becomes part of your progress. Every closed door pushes you to find or create another one. And while others are held back by the fear of hearing no, you move forward with a kind of quiet confidence, knowing that rejection is not working against you, it's shaping you into someone stronger, sharper, and more prepared for what's next. Rejection also forces you to separate your identity from your outcome, and that's a level of maturity most people never reach. When something doesn't work out, it's easy to think, I failed, instead of, this attempt failed. That small difference changes everything. Because if you attach rejection to your identity, you shrink. But if you attach it to the process, you improve. Stoicism teaches exactly this: focus on what you can control, your effort, your preparation, your mindset, and detach from what you cannot, the final decision, other people's opinions, external outcomes. Once you live by that, rejection stops feeling like a personal attack and starts feeling like part of the system. There's also a hidden advantage in rejection that most people overlook: it filters out the weak version of you. The version that depends on approval, that quits when things don't go smoothly, that needs quick validation to keep moving. Every rejection tests that version. And every time you keep going anyway, you replace it with a stronger one. A version that is patient, self-reliant, and focused. That's why rejection is uncomfortable. It's not just testing your path, it's testing your identity. And then comes the long-term shift. You stop chasing opportunities desperately and start building yourself so strongly that opportunities come to you. Your mindset becomes calmer. Your actions become sharper. You don't rush to prove anything anymore, you focus on becoming someone undeniable. Because you understand something most people don't: when you are ready, the right doors don't need to be forced open. At that point, rejection becomes almost neutral. It no longer shakes your confidence or delays your progress. It simply becomes feedback, redirection, or a sign to keep refining your path. And the real power is this: you are no longer afraid of hearing no, because you know that no matter what the answer is, you will keep moving forward. And that mindset alone puts you ahead of most people who stopped the moment things didn't go their way. Stop chasing, start attracting sounds powerful, but taken literally, it can turn into passivity. Things don't just come to you because you step back. What actually changes is how you show up. Chasing is desperate energy, over-explaining, over-giving, over-pushing for outcomes. Attraction is grounded energy, clear standards, consistent action, and the willingness to walk away from what doesn't fit. When you stop chasing, you stop negotiating your value. You don't lower your standards to keep people, and you don't force opportunities that aren't aligned. That alone changes how others respond to you. Not because you're playing a trick, but because you're no longer signaling neediness. You're signaling clarity. And people respect clarity. But attraction is not inaction. It's focused effort in the right direction. You build skills. You improve your habits. You show up consistently. You deliver value without needing immediate validation. That's what creates pull. Because now, when opportunities appear, you're ready for them, and when they don't, you're still moving forward. There's also a deeper shift here. When you stop chasing approval, you stop making decisions based on fear of loss. You start choosing based on alignment. What actually moves your life forward? That makes your energy more stable, your actions more deliberate, and your presence more confident. And that's the real attraction. Not that the world suddenly bends toward you, but that you become someone worth choosing. Someone who doesn't need to convince, doesn't need to chase, and doesn't need to force outcomes, because your value is already visible through how you live, how you work, and how you carry yourself. Silence becomes powerful when it comes from control, not avoidance. Anyone can react, argue, explain, defend, but very few can hold their ground without needing to say anything. When you don't chase after rejection, don't beg for approval, and don't rush to prove your worth, you send a clear message without words: you respect yourself enough to walk away. Not every situation deserves your energy. When you respond to everything, you place yourself in a position where others control your reactions. But when you choose silence, you take that control back. You decide what is worth your attention and what is not. And that alone creates a different kind of presence, calm, steady, and difficult to shake. Silence also creates space. Without your reaction, people are left with their own thoughts. They begin to reflect, to question, to reconsider. Not because you forced them to, but because you didn't. And while you're not using silence as a tactic to manipulate, the effect is real. It shifts the dynamic. It shows that your value is not dependent on their response. But the most important part is internal. Silence protects your peace. It prevents you from saying things out of emotion, from reacting in ways you might regret, from lowering your standards just to be understood. It keeps your focus on what actually matters: your growth, your direction, your next move. Because in the end, silence is not about them at all. It's about you staying grounded, composed, and in control. Even when things don't go your way. Being underestimated feels like disrespect at first, but it can quietly become one of your biggest advantages, if you use it right. When people don't expect much from you, they stop watching closely. They stop questioning your every move. And that gives you something rare: space. Space to improve without pressure, to make mistakes without scrutiny, to build without noise. Most people rush to prove others wrong. They react emotionally, trying to defend their worth immediately. But that reaction often wastes energy and exposes insecurity. Real power is different. It stays quiet. It accepts the misunderstanding and uses it as fuel. Because while others are busy judging based on what they see now, you are focused on what you are becoming. When you stop needing to correct every opinion, your attention returns to your own growth. You train harder, think clearer, act more consistently. And because there's no spotlight on you, there's no pressure to perform, only the freedom to improve. That's where real progress happens. Not in proving, but in building. And then, over time, the shift becomes visible. The same people who underestimated you begin to notice something different. Not because you told them, but because your results made it undeniable. And that's the moment where silence turns into impact. Because true power is not in being recognized early. It's in becoming undeniable later, without ever needing to announce it. Pain is raw energy, but it doesn't automatically turn into growth. If you don't direct it, it turns into overthinking, resentment, and wasted time. That's why most people feel rejection deeply but don't actually change because of it. They stay stuck in the emotion instead of converting it into action. The difference is not in the pain, it's in what you do with it. When you choose to use that energy, everything shifts. Instead of replaying the rejection, you start asking better questions. What can I improve? Where am I lacking? What skill, habit, or mindset needs work? That's how pain becomes productive. It stops being something that drains you and starts becoming something that drives you. Every no becomes a signal, not a setback. A signal that there is another level you haven't reached yet. But there's an important truth here, the goal is not revenge. Chasing validation through success will still keep you dependent on others. Real power comes when your focus shifts inward. You improve not to prove someone wrong, but because you refuse to stay the same. That mindset builds something much stronger than external success, it builds self-respect. And when you reach that level, the outcome takes care of itself. You become more disciplined, more focused, more capable. Your results start speaking, not because you wanted attention, but because your effort demanded it. And at that point, it doesn't matter who doubted you. Because you've already proven everything to the only person it truly mattered to, yourself. Detaching from the outcome doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop letting the result decide your value. When your self-worth depends on one specific outcome, every delay feels like failure and every rejection feels personal. That creates pressure, and pressure often disrupts performance. You start forcing things, overthinking decisions, and reacting emotionally instead of acting clearly. Stoicism separates effort from outcome. Your responsibility is the quality of what you do, your focus, your discipline, your consistency. The result depends on many factors outside your control: timing, environment, other people, circumstances. When you mix these two together, you lose stability. But when you separate them, you regain control over your mindset. Detachment creates freedom in your actions. You do your best without the fear of losing something that was never fully yours to control in the first place. That reduces desperation. And when desperation drops, clarity increases. You make better decisions. You perform with more confidence because you are not mentally attached to a single outcome. Ironically, this is often when results improve. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped forcing. You act from focus instead of fear. From discipline instead of pressure. And that shift changes the quality of everything you do. In the end, detachment is not about expecting less from yourself, it's about trusting your process enough that you don't panic over results. You stay consistent, you stay grounded, and you let outcomes unfold while you keep improving. Confidence is not built in moments of success, it is built in moments where success is uncertain. Rejection is one of those moments. It challenges your expectation, tests your patience, and forces you to confront discomfort instead of avoiding it. At first, it feels like a setback, but over time it becomes training. Each rejection teaches your mind that no is not the end, and that discomfort is not danger. The more you experience rejection, the more familiar it becomes. And familiarity reduces fear. What once felt heavy starts to feel manageable. You stop attaching emotional meaning to every outcome. Instead of seeing rejection as a reflection of your worth, you start seeing it as part of the process. That shift changes how you respond. You become calmer, more stable, and less reactive. As fear decreases, confidence naturally grows. Not because everything starts going your way, but because you stop being controlled by what might go wrong. You take more action. You try more things. You stop hesitating as much because failure no longer feels like something that defines you. It becomes something you can handle. And that is where real strength develops, not in avoiding loss, but in becoming comfortable with it. The strongest people are not the ones who never face rejection. They are the ones who no longer fear it. Because once fear loses its power, confidence becomes your default state, not something you have to force. You can't control every external event, who rejects you, what people think, how situations unfold, but you always control your reaction. And that reaction is where your real power exists. Most people lose that power without realizing it. They react immediately, emotionally, impulsively, and in doing so, they hand control over to the situation instead of keeping it within themselves. Stoicism focuses on that exact moment between what happens and how you respond. That pause is everything. When you stay calm instead of reacting emotionally, you create space to think clearly. In that space, you are no longer being driven by ego, frustration, or fear, you are acting with awareness. And that changes the outcome of how you handle everything in life. Staying grounded doesn't mean ignoring emotions. It means not being controlled by them. You acknowledge what you feel, but you don't let it dictate your actions. That distinction is what builds real emotional strength. Because when your emotions no longer control your decisions, you stop making choices you later regret. And over time, this discipline becomes part of your identity. You don't need to force calmness. It becomes your default response. You don't need to prove anything, you simply act with control. And that control is what keeps you stable, focused, and unshaken, even when things don't go your way. Absence can create clarity, but it only becomes powerful when it comes from self-respect, not from trying to trigger a reaction in someone else. When you step back after rejection, the real purpose is not to make them feel your absence, but to protect your own peace and regain your balance. If your actions are still focused on how others will feel, you are still emotionally tied to the outcome. Stoicism teaches detachment, not emotional strategy games. The healthiest reason to withdraw is simple: you are choosing to stop investing energy where it is not valued or reciprocated. That shift brings your attention back to yourself, your growth, your direction, your stability. When you stop chasing validation, you stop depending on external recognition to feel complete. Ironically, when you truly detach, the dynamic does change. Not because you are trying to create a reaction, but because your energy is no longer available for unnecessary access. People often notice consistency more in absence than in constant presence. But the goal is not their realization, it is your freedom from needing it. Real strength is when your absence is not a message, but a boundary. A quiet decision that your time, focus, and energy will only go where they are respected. And in that space, you stop trying to be missed. And start focusing on becoming someone who doesn't need to be. Rejection doesn't just remove opportunities, it refines direction. Every no forces you to pause and reconsider what actually fits you, what doesn't, and what you were chasing out of emotion rather than alignment. In that way, rejection slowly becomes a filter. It separates what is temporary desire from what is real purpose. At first, it feels like loss because you are focused on what didn't happen. But over time, if you reflect instead of react, you start noticing a pattern. Certain paths close for a reason. Certain situations don't last for a reason. And those closed doors push you toward better decisions, even if you don't see it immediately. That's how identity begins to form, not through comfort, but through correction. Stoicism teaches that nothing external defines you unless you allow it to. Rejection only becomes destructive when you tie it to your self-worth. But when you detach from that idea, it becomes information instead of injury. You stop asking, "Why was I not enough?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me about my direction?" That shift turns pain into clarity. And with time, you realize something important: you are not the same person who first experienced those rejections. You are more aware, more focused, more grounded. Not because everything worked out, but because everything that didn't work out shaped how you think, choose, and move. And that is how identity is built, not from acceptance alone, but from everything that once pushed you away and forced you to grow. What if every rejection in your life was actually preparing you for something greater? Would you still fear it? Rejection doesn't close doors, it reveals the ones meant only for the strong enough to keep walking. If you feel this message gave you value, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comment section. Your support helps this message reach more people.